Alrighty, we've created our front panel pieces and now we're going to create the back. Referring back to the design, you can see that there are no panel lines. We have the center back, which we already have down here, the center back seam, the dart, which we have, and the existing side seam. So the only change that we need to make to this pattern now, to this block, is to shorten it. So remember, we shortened the front. If we shorten the front, we need to shorten the back as well. And we're going to shorten it by 15 centimeters. So on the first one, I drew the lines onto the block. The other way that you can do it is to draw the lines onto the pattern after you've traced it off. So placing a weight on it so that it doesn't move around, and then trace around all the way around the block. When you're coming to the corner, make sure you're holding them down so that you're not pushing and that you get an accurate tracing. So I'm starting at the center back. There's the 2 notches all the way down. And my pen might need to be replaced. So I'm tracing around the shaping of the dart, marking in the notches, and I also have to mark the end of the dart using the little hole here. So I'm just making sure that it's going through to my paper. Yep. And across to the center back. Now, before I take it off, I'm also going to trace the grain line. If you forget to trace it, it's not a problem. You can just place your block back on later to transfer the grain line across. Okay, first thing is to extend the arms of the dart. So draw them in and extend it up into the seam allowance, like that. Now we need to remember to shorten by 15 centimeters. So I'm marking 15 on this side and 15 on this side, and then rolling that across. Now before we forget, here is your grain line markings. Okay, we are ready to add our seam allowances. Again, copying the same seam allowances and hem allowance from the front. 3 centimeters on the hem, 12 millimeters around the rest of the piece. Turning your ruler gently to create that curve and not flattening out any sections of the curve as you add your seam allowance. I'm following the shape of the dart very carefully. And the 12 millimeters on the last side seam. And curving it. Okay, extending the seams. And the notches. We're ready to cut out a notch. Before I cut it all out, I'm just going to double check the flow through. Here's the side seam with a single notch here. So place that on. And it looks like if I walk the seam to here, that's looking good. So those 2 points are matching. and then I spin it around, and I'm really happy with that flow through. So that hem is matching the position of that hem, so I don't need to make any changes. If one was shorter or longer, I would need to trim the other piece to make sure that it matched. Alrighty, ready to do the notches. So I'll start up in the waist here. Notch the arms of the dart, always making sure that when you're notching, you're following the line of the stitching. Okay, the double notches for the centre back. The hem. The last seam, which is the side seam, the hem, and the hip notch. So remembering, it is important always when we transfer a notch from a block to a pattern, sorry, not a notch, a drill hole, in a dart, we need to move the position of that drill hole. So by moving the drill hole, we're not changing the actual dart or the stitching lines, we're moving the drill hole out of the way so that when you physically create a hole in the garment, that hole is then concealed inside the end of the dart. So we measure across the top of the dart, which is 30 mils or 3 centimeters, and you mark a little halfway point. So 1.5, and then you connect the end of the dart with that line, and now we measure up from the end 15 mils up to here, and that is the position of our new drill hole. We circle it, we create an actual hole there, and we label it dart end so 15 millimeters past. It's important to indicate what the distance that you're sewing past. 15 millimeters is what we use at UTS. Some companies will use 20 millimeters, more or less. So this information will help make sure that the dart finishes, the stitching of the dart finishes in the right position, and it doesn't end up going too long or too short. So finishing our labeling, name, garment, panel skirt. This is the back. And this, the cutting instruction for this one will be 1 pair. Cut 1 pair self, size 10, and I will leave the numbering to later.